My name is Roy Neuberger. It's also Yisrael Neuberger, but I didn't have a Hebrew name at all for many years, and that really is the subject of my first book, From Central Park to Sinai. I grew up in a very privileged home on Fifth Avenue in New York City, and we still have a wonderful family. I have an older sister and a younger brother, wonderful parents, and we grew up in a home that stressed values, education, getting along with each other, making the world a better place. We were a Jewish family, two Jewish parents, but we had absolutely no Jewishness in our life at all. I didn't have a bris, I didn't have a bar mitzvah, and we had no Jewish holidays at all. My favorite day of the year was December 25th. It says in the Gemara that each child in the womb is visited by a malach, an angel. And that angel, the whole time that we're in our mother's womb, that angel is teaching us the Torah. When we are born, we forget what the angel taught. But during our lifetime, maybe Hashem brings us into contact with the world of Torah, and we hear those words of Torah, and that's when we remember what the angel taught us in the womb. So I was this kid, and I was growing up on Fifth Avenue in this wealthy environment, and it was all wrong. Everything was wrong. And I kept asking myself, what's wrong? I have everything. I have all the money. I have this wonderful family. Why am I not happy? And I couldn't find any answers. And in the book, I tell about all the different places. I looked everywhere. There was no place that I failed to look in to find out what's missing in my life. Whether it was reading, great literature, or hiking in the wilderness, or later on in my life, getting into other so-called religions. For example, Buddhism. I read these esoteric Buddhist books, and I used to wake myself up in the middle of the night every night to try and remember my dreams, because I thought I'm going to find God in those dreams if I can remember every detail. And this went on for years, 3 years. But then you actually realize that you're living like a zombie, because you think to yourself the ideal in this way of life is to sit on a mountaintop and contemplate and try and reach what they call nirvana, enlightenment, whatever it means. And then you realize, what? I'm a person. I'm married. I live a normal life. I eat, I sleep, I walk, I talk. I don't want to sit on a mountaintop and contemplate my whole life. That's not normal. And besides that, I saw over the years that filling up that vacuum that was inside me, it just wasn't happening. And no matter what people might have thought on the outside, I was suffering like crazy on the inside. Hashem made a miracle. And in high school, I was fortunate enough. It was a secular high school, a shall we say, sophisticated private school in New York City. A lot of Jews, but no Jewishness. But there, Hashem made a huge miracle for me. And I met my future wife in high school.
We met very young in high school. I had just turned 15, he was 16. And I felt that emptiness inside as I was growing up. What is life for? how do you know what's right, what's wrong? I wanted to be a good person. How do you know what good is? The way we grew up, what I thought was right, maybe you thought it was wrong. So it was wrong for you, it was right for me. We had no clue what's good, how do we live for more than ourselves, make the world better, live for a higher ideal, find the truth in life. And I had this vague feeling inside of this emptiness. One day's like the next, and what's life really for? So then when I met my husband at a young age, he made me more aware of this emptiness, and together we searched.
Neither of us had a clue, but as we eliminated every other possibility, we got closer and closer to the point at which all that was left was Hashem and the Torah and the holy Jewish way of life. We got married when we were in college at the University of Michigan. For a few years, the marriage was tough, because a marriage without Hashem it's not a marriage. And everything is torture if you don't have Hashem in your life. I can remember the exact moment that this happened, when it seemed like our whole marriage was blowing up, God forbid. It was January 10th, 1966 in Ann Arbor, Michigan, 2 a.m. I woke up and I started to cry, and I thought my whole life is falling apart. What's left? I tried everything. And then I realized, wait a minute, there's one thing I didn't try. God, are you there? Are you there? God, if you're there, help me, get me out of this. And that's when I started to believe in Hashem. Then I still didn't want to be Jewish. I didn't want to live a Jewish life. So that's when I got into alien ways of life like Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity. I even wrote a book at one point called Why the Jews Are Wrong and the Christians Are Right. Thank God that book was never published. But I was very upset at the time. And then, years later, we met Rebbetzin Esther Youngreis in the spring of 1974.
We were living 60 miles north of New York City, up the Hudson, in a beautiful place called Cornwall on the Hudson in New York. And my husband was the editor and publisher of a weekly newspaper. We had a printing business. And we visited a publisher in upstate New York where we wanted to learn more about how to make a more successful paper, a better quality paper. And a Jewish man, not, I don't know how observant he was, but he was not, didn't have a yarmulke on, but he was had a very strong sense of his Jewishness. And he, at the end of the day, after we had toured his plant and discussed everything with him, he invited us to his house for some refreshments. He turned on the 6 o'clock news, and what was it? It was October 1973, Yom Kippur War. And he was so, he looked and he said, oh, don't believe this. General Sharon crossed the Suez Canal. He has the Egyptians surrounded. They're marching to Damascus. A week ago, Israel was lost, and now look at this. And he was crying. And my husband standing there said, oh, yeah, I saw in the paper there's some war in the Middle East. And this man looked at him and he started screaming at him. He said, what kind of a Jew are you? Are you made of stone? Don't you have a heart? What kind of a Jew are you? Now, this was like, wow. I mean, no one ever said this to us before, and we couldn't answer the question, and it kept ringing in our heads. What kind of a Jew are you? What kind of Jew are you? We better look into our Jewishness. What kind of Jew are we? I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. And we asked a friend to take us to the nearest synagogue. The nearest synagogue from where we lived was 5 miles away in Newburgh, New York, and he took us the following week. He said, this interesting speaker. It was Rebbetzin Esther Youngreis. That was in the spring of 1974, 36 years ago. When we heard her, that was unbelievable. We had studied in the finest universities, the University of Michigan, Oxford University. We had advanced degrees. We heard brilliant people speak. But as far as our Jewishness, we weren't even a nursery school. So she told us all our souls were at Mount Sinai when God gave us the Torah. We taught the world there's a God. We gave morality to the world. We have our Torah to study day and night. So we were both crying. We were so moved. What do we do now? We wrote to her, what do we do now? There's no synagogue here. Come to my classes on Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn. Every Tuesday night, I teach the Torah portion of the week. We looked at each other. That's a 2-hour drive each way from where we lived. So during the energy crisis, it was very hard to get gas. And the worst night of the week, as far as getting the newspaper ready for the printer, we looked at each other, we have to go. We have to find out who we are and how we should live. So my husband got up at 2 in the morning to get the newspaper done. We drove 2 hours each way to Brooklyn to the Torah portion of the week classes, and finally, we're finding out how to have a good marriage, how to raise our children, how to understand what's going on in the world. It's the center of our whole week.
And we started going to Torah classes. We went on a trip to Israel. We had the first Jewish experience of our life. I had never wanted to go to Israel before. I thought the Jews stole it from the Arabs. But the more we studied Torah, the more we realized this land, Hashem gave it to our fathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And their descendants belongs to us. Hashem gave it to us. So we went to Eretz Yisrael. We had the first Shabbos of our life. We lived like Jews, ate kosher food for 2 weeks, and came back to America after that. And we looked at the existence. We'd been living in a small town in upstate New York. And we looked at each other. We can't live like this anymore. We moved to the community in Long Island where Rebbetzin Young Rice's husband, may he rest in peace, was the rabbi in North Woodmere, New York. We moved in. Our 5-year-old daughter, who had been about to go to Catholic school in 1st grade, was instead enrolled in Torah Academy for Girls in Far Rockaway. Thank God we had more children. And from then on, we just jumped into a Torah way of life. We had thousands of guests in our home for Shabbos over the years. We had people who lived with us.
I'll give an example of one story of someone who lived with us. There was a girl who was in her early 20s named Rachel, a Jewish girl, but all her friends not Jewish, a crowd that was not a good influence on her. Her boss was very worried about her. He was an observant Jew. And he said, Rachel, why don't you go to Hineni, Rebbetzin Young Grace's organization, meet some nice Jewish people. So she went, and she really loved the class, and she came to us for Shabbos, and she loved it, and she moved in with us. So that was like about 34 years ago. And we did not hear from her for a long time. She lived with us for like about 3 months. And then she left and went on with her life, and we didn't hear from her for a long time. So 18 years later, we got a letter from her. Dear Yisrael and Leah, do you remember me? I was a very confused young girl when I lived with you. I want to thank you for everything that you did for me, and thank Rebbetzin Young Grace for everything that she did. I still have the siddur that you gave me. I daven from it every day. I live in Israel. My husband's name is Avraham. We have 2 sons and 2 daughters. Our son's bar mitzvah is coming up in Jerusalem in about 3 months. Please come to the bar mitzvah. So we were so happy and so excited to hear from her and that she was doing so great. And we looked at each other, how can we just pick ourselves up, go to bar mitzvah in Jerusalem? We would love to go, but we have so many responsibilities here. And it turned out, remember the little girl, our daughter, who almost went to Catholic school? Sarah, her name was Susan then. We didn't even have Hebrew names when we first met Rebbe Tzinian Grace. So Susan, who became Sarah, instead of going to the Catholic school, went to Torah Academy for Girls in Far Rockaway to tag, and she got married, moved to Israel, lives in Beit El, and she had a baby boy at about the same time as Rachel's son's bar mitzvah. So we did go to Jerusalem for the bris of our grandson and the bar mitzvah of Rachel's son. It was such a beautiful simcha. It was so pure, to me, mystic, a real Yiddish simcha, a real Jewish, beautiful, beautiful simcha.
But that is really the subject of my first book, From Central Park to Sinai, How I Found My Jewish Soul, a story of going from a very distant place and coming back to Hashem, which is really the story of what's happening in today's world to Am Yisrael. Because Be'ezus Hashem, we're all coming back to Hashem in tshuva.